There's an old pagan saying that goes, the more you take that is not yours, the more that will be taken from you. That includes paining anyone who doesn't deserve to be pained, and in return perhaps getting that pain shoved back on you in form of a threefold. Okay, that's part of it. That's not all of it. And it doesn't just go for one individual, it can go for an entire species. Some species in particular, human beings being a great example, some species in particular have a tendency to be destructive. And the more that a species in general destroys nature, destroys Mother Earth, the more she will punish them for what they've done. Humans have no fangs, they have no claws, they've got no fur, they're very slow, they're very weak. If you didn't have your inventions, you'd already be extinct. They're susceptible to disease. If you compare a human to a lemming and you ask somebody, which one's stronger? Most people, because of their arrogance, will say the human is stronger. But actually, the lemming is a lot stronger, because if you size comparison, say, what can a lemming do versus what can a human do? You would be able to leap 2 stories in the air if you were a lemming, but you can barely leap enough to get yourself off the ground for more than a few seconds. If you were a lemming, you know, you could, despite your very stocky, fat, plump nature, our arms and legs would be like that skinny, and we'd be much wider, and we could still jump nearly 2 stories in the air. Size comparison wise. Just because it looks small and it looks weak doesn't really necessarily mean that it is. You know, I won't say it's the strongest of things, but it's definitely stronger than a human being. So, going back to, if you take what isn't yours, you get the more that you take what isn't yours, the more that's taken from you. Why has this specific species, the squirrel, found a loophole? Of course, if any is going to find a loophole, it's a squirrel. It's a fucking squirrel. Let's just say that. In all seriousness, though, it's for a very good reason. And the reason is, it lies in why they're like that in the beginning. Why are they so greedy that they hog all the food from all the other species and doesn't let anybody else have any, and potentially other species starve, and then they bury way more than they could ever think to eat, much less remember where they planted. Every year a squirrel can bury up to 10,000 nuts. It's said that they forget at least 1/3 of, if not more, understandably so, of where those are planted. They don't need that. They're taking way more than they are allowed to have, right? So why then is a squirrel like basically a rat on steroids? Why are they so strong? Why haven't they lost any of their strength? They're very strong. They're like little super animals. If we humans were a squirrel, we'd be able to do a lot more even than what a lemming can do. So, you know, just, yeah, they're like, imagine that. Imagine a lemming on, like, radioactive steroids. Like imagine like Hulk lemming. That is what a squirrel basically is the equivalent of. So why haven't they lost any of their strength? They're constantly taking shit that's not theirs. Why haven't they lost it? If that rule really is there, it all goes from intent. Now, I won't say that every single squirrel out there isn't, you know, evil. But I'll say that most of them, the tendency of the totem in general, the reason behind their greed comes from obsession. It doesn't come from heartlessness. It doesn't come from lack of compassion, which is where most selfishness comes from, is lack of compassion. But typically, that's not where it comes from, not with the squirrel. Typically, it comes from an obsession, an uncontrollable obsession, much like an addiction. Think of a squirrel like somebody that is heavily addicted to heroin. And that's the only thing they can think about. And you're going to laugh, but it's true. Their brains, unlike humans, unlike that person that's heavily addicted to heroin, that if they really wanted to, could choose to get it under control. Unlike humans, squirrels don't have that. They don't have nearly as much frontal lobe capacity to choose. And so, you know how much willpower it takes. If you ever tried to fight an addiction, any addiction, you know how much willpower it takes, and you as a human have that capacity in your frontal lobe. And you still know how difficult it is. Well, imagine not even having that capacity in your brain. Imagine having very little capacity to resist because of the way that your brain is wired. You literally do not have that capacity in your frontal lobe to override your addiction. So that's a squirrel. And Mother Nature says, okay, I understand that this is the way you are, and I understand that you will never change. But if you're going to be this way, if you're going to be controlled and driven by your obsession, so much so that it causes others to suffer and perish in your path, then I must make sure that whatever you're addicted to is something that can mend the land in return. So basically, what Mother Earth did is she said, okay, everywhere you go, every second of your life, what you're going to do, unknowingly so, is going to be patching up the damage you've caused. Basically, squirrels, they constantly are searching for nuts and burying them, right? But they only remember about a third, if they're lucky, a third of what they bury. In fact, I read somewhere that a squirrel can bury up to 10,000 nuts per year. That's insane. It's like, I don't even know if an elephant can eat that much. All the nuts that they cannot find because they forget where they are, those turn into trees. So it's said, no one has ever scientifically found out the exact percentage, but it's said that the majority of trees in any forest, any given forest that you see, the majority of those trees were planted by squirrels. If something had not helped the seeds stay safe under the ground and be buried, then many of those seeds would perish before they ever got a chance to turn into trees. So actually, the squirrel is harvesting the seeds, unknowingly planting them, and planting entire forests in its path. So yes, initially it may cause destruction. Initially it may take things that is not belonging to it. But in the end, by accident, it gets returned back to nature anyway. So it's initially causes destruction and then immediately mends the destruction through the planting of the seeds. without even knowing it, without even realizing it. A lot of totems do things on purpose, but squirrel's not one of those totems, and you laugh again, but they're not. Squirrels do things on accident, beautiful things, but it's all on accident. Because they're not thinking that far in advance. That's not the way the brain works. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm saying they have this obsession, and that obsession literally runs their entire life. It floods their entire brain, and that's all that they can think about. If they didn't have that obsession, they'd be able to think about things more, just like anyone who has an addiction. So I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm saying that obsession means that they couldn't think that far in advance. Everything they're doing is on accident. They accidentally cause other creatures to go hungry because they hog all the food. If they ever notice what they've done, I'm sure they feel bad about it, but the obsession won't let them stop. Much like I said, an addiction, it literally won't let them stop. And then they accidentally mend their path by planting these new trees. And eventually those new trees will bear even more fruits for other creatures. So, and even shelter for other creatures to live in. Entire ecosystems actually depend on squirrels to be created. More than half of the forest in this world wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for squirrels. And that is why they're spared. That is why none of their strength's been taken away. That is why when you look at a squirrel, it appears strong. It appears to have heightened senses. It appears to have everything that it needs to survive. It appears actually to be quite hardy and quite adaptable. No ill effects have come from, at least the totem in general, have come from its tendencies. However, it's still a prey animal. And it's a prey animal because that greed needs to be balanced out. They can overpopulate quite easily if they're not kept in check. And so, yes, Mother Nature had to make them a prey animal, and it had to make them small. But other than that, like I said, they're like, to a lemming, they're giants. Basically like a lemming or a mouse on steroids. Tiny as they might be, they're very, very strong. If the squirrel did not plant the forests, they wouldn't be strong like they are. They'd be weak like us humans. The destruction we've caused, the majority of our human existence, our species, the destruction we've caused, we've not even attempted to go back and fix and mend. What little we are trying to attempt to fix now has only merely just scratched the surface of what we need to do. And most humans are too selfish to care. We should understand that the individuals, usually, I won't say always, but usually, individual humans, you'll find the ones that are the strongest, the ones that have the best luck in their life, are the ones that have never done wrong, are the ones that have a heart and that strive to mend and nurture and protect instead of destroy.